One of Earth's most breathtaking natural wonders is under threat, and it's not from a storm or rising sea levels, it's from a coal mine. Over 1,000 kilometers from the ocean, deep in the dry heart of Queensland, a single industrial project is setting off a chain reaction that could help destroy the Great Barrier Reef. This is the Carmichael mine. It extracts up to 10 million tons of low-quality thermal coal every year, siphons water from ancient underground systems, and sends its dusty payload by rail straight to the reef's doorstep. From there, it's loaded onto cargo ships that churn through coral waters already on the brink of collapse. This mine also punches through sacred Indigenous land, pumps out more carbon than entire countries, and could be the key that unlocks a flood of even bigger, dirtier coal projects across the Galilee Basin. So, how did this happen? Who's benefiting? And can the Great Barrier Reef be saved before it's too late? Let's find out. The story of the Carmichael mine begins in 2010 with a promise. That year, Indian billionaire Gautam Adani unveiled a bold vision to build Australia's biggest coal mine in Queensland's Galilee Basin. How big? 60 million tons of coal each year, a 90-year lifespan, thousands of jobs, energy for India, and for some, a lifeline for struggling towns in rural Australia. But was it really that simple? Not quite. There was a major problem. Actually, several. The mine would sit above the Great Artesian Basin, one of the biggest underground water reserves on Earth. It's water that many farmers and communities rely on. What happens if that gets damaged? No one was sure. And that's not all. Endangered animals like the black-throated finch lived nearby, with nowhere else to go. Just off the coast was the Great Barrier Reef, already under pressure. More coal meant more ships, more dredging, and more pollution. In 2014, the federal government gave the green light. That's when the protests began. Legal fights broke out. Environmentalists warned of damage that couldn't be undone. Indigenous leaders said they were left out of the process. Big banks backed away. Scientists raised concerns but were pushed aside. Even with all the backlash, Adani didn't stop. Construction finally kicked off in 2019, and in December 2021, the first coal shipment left the site. Today, the Carmichael mine is up and running. It's smaller than first planned, but it's still digging, moving, and sending coal from deep in the outback to ports along the reef. But this isn't just about one mine. This project could open the floodgates to a dozen others across the Galilee Basin. A coal corridor that, once built, may be impossible to stop. And the cost? It might be the reef itself. So, how was this engineered, and what are the consequences? The Carmichael mine spans nearly 450 square kilometers of previously untouched land. It's a vast and staggering operation, an open-cut site that devours the surface of central Queensland like a slow-moving scar. But what does that actually look like on the ground? 6 massive pits, 5 underground mines, giant conveyors snaking across the dry landscape. Even a private airport built just to fly workers in and out. This isn't something you build overnight. It took years to carve out the land, and even more to silence the fierce resistance that stood in its way. But once the coal is dug up, how do you move it? That's where things get even more complicated. A 200-kilometer rail line was built to link the mine to Abbott Point, a coastal port sitting alarmingly close to the Great Barrier Reef, one of the world's most fragile marine ecosystems. But here's the twist. This rail line wasn't part of the original blueprint. The initial plan called for a much longer route, 388 kilometers, and a much bigger price tag. So what changed? When global banks started pulling their funding and public backlash intensified, Adani was forced to pivot. Instead of building an entirely new rail corridor, they tapped into existing narrow-gauge lines to cut costs and time. It was a calculated compromise, but one that came with its own set of concerns. And if that pivot wasn't enough, the company changed its name to Adani Mining, rebranded as Bravus, a fresh identity for a project mired in controversy. But was it really a fresh start? The company claimed Bravus meant brave in Latin. Unfortunately for them, Latin scholars quickly pointed out a different translation, mercenary, or worse, crook. A clever name might change headlines, but it doesn't change facts. And the facts around Carmichael raise serious questions. So what kind of coal does this mine produce, and why does it matter? The answer is thermal coal, used to generate electricity. But this isn't high-grade stuff. It clocks in at around 5,000 to 5,500 kilocalories per kilogram, which is considered low quality. The ash content, a troubling 11%. That means more pollution when burned, more smog, more fine particles, more long-term damage to the atmosphere. And the bigger picture? Over its projected 60-year life, the Carmichael mine could be responsible for nearly 5 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions. To put that in perspective, that's more than what many entire countries pump into the atmosphere in a single year. Water is another crisis. So where does the mine get it all from? It pulls from the Bellondo River system and taps into the Great Artesian Basin. That's one of the largest underground water sources in the world. Adani claimed it would use 12.5 billion liters a year. That's about 13 Olympic pools every single day. But is that the whole story? Government documents suggest the real use could be much higher. And here's the scary part. Once the water table drops, it might never come back. What happens then? Farmers downstream could lose their bore water, and ancient springs like the culturally important Dungmabula Springs could dry out forever. What about the science behind it? Adani's groundwater modeling was questioned by experts, including the CSIRO. They found the company had cherry-picked data, ignored key risks, and underestimated how much water would be lost. Yet, despite these concerns, the project still got the green light. But it's not just about water. Let's talk about wildlife. The black-throated finch, the yucca skink, the ornamental snake. These species are already struggling, and now their last remaining habitat is right under the Carmichael mine. Adani promised a management plan to protect them, but experts say it's more like a death sentence, because part of the plan involved grazing cattle in recovery zones for the finch, and some of the land meant to protect wildlife was already earmarked for other industrial projects. And then there's the reef. Yes, the Great Barrier Reef. What's the connection? At Abbott Point, coal from the mine gets loaded onto ships, and those ships pass right through the reef's waters. Over 1 million cubic meters of seabed were dredged to expand the terminal. Dredging stirs up sand and mud, clouding the water and choking coral. And with more than 500 ships a year expected to pass through, the risks are higher than ever. More noise, more pollution, and more chances of disaster. Just one spill, one crash, and the damage could be felt around the world. But what about the carbon emissions? That's the part that's hard to ignore. Even though the coal is burned in other countries, the damage still adds up. The Carmichael mine could be a carbon bomb, fueling a warming planet, heating the oceans, and killing coral reefs. The Great Barrier Reef is already in trouble. Half its coral is gone. So what happens when the next big wave of heat hits? And then there's the money, or rather, the lack of it. More than 30 banks around the world said no to funding this mine. Insurance companies backed out, investors pulled their money. Across Australia, people protested, marches, sit-ins, even huge human signs. The Stop Adani movement changed the conversation. At one point, 44% of Australians were against the mine. Only 30% supported it. That's a major shift. And the promise of jobs? That didn't hold up either. Adani once claimed the mine would create 10,000 jobs, but under oath, their own experts said it might only make 1,500, and many of those wouldn't last long. So why is it still happening? Because Carmichael opens the gate to the Galilee Basin. If it runs smoothly, it sets the stage for more mines. Bigger ones, deeper ones, maybe 10 or more. Together, they could pull out 330 million tons of coal every year. That's more than all the coal Australia produces right now, and that would be a disaster. In the name of economic growth, Australia is carving out its interior, sending fossil fuels to the world while its own reef bleaches and dies. And behind it all, a company accused of fraud in India, a mine built on contested Indigenous land, a name that means mercenary. So what's really brave here? Building a mine while the world burns, or standing up to stop it? What do you think? Can the Carmichael mine be justified, or is it a disaster waiting to happen? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe. By the way, if you're interested in how Australia is handling its ecological future, don't miss our video on the Outback's unexpected transformation. Could a massive inland sea reshape the desert? Click here to find out more.